You all listen so extremely well. Wow, we've got a very obedient crowd in here today. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first meeting of 2016 for the Manatee County Tiger Bay Club. I am so glad that you all are here. My name is Ben Bacher, and I have the distinct honor of being allowed to chair this great organization for the coming year. We just recently had our first board meeting of the year, and I'm very excited to say that we have just a wonderful, wonderful slate of topics coming up for you guys over the next 12 months that I think will be just fantastic social discussion, educational topics, and just really, really mind-opening discussions that we can have here as a community because we're all here because we're involved and because we care for our community, because we want it to be a better place. So we will continue to uphold our responsibility to help enrich that discussion. I would like to take just this moment and remind you all that if you do have your cell phones on you, if you can just please, out of courtesy, flip them over to vibrate or silent while we're in the hour for our lunch, just to be more respectful of our speakers and our attendees. And with that, if we could all please stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. While we still got a few people just filtering in, I'd like to do just a few announcements. First off, we want to once again thank METV, Manatee Educational Television, for being here and for graciously offering to film and archive these. Do not hesitate at any time to go to metvweb.com and check out everything they have to offer, where they are also archiving these. You can check out our website as well, manateetigerbay.org, where we constantly, through METV YouTube, archive all of our past meetings so that you can get caught up in case you were to miss one. Next, we want to remind everyone of our Tiger by the Tail Award. We created this last year to just challenge the members on just keeping the discussion lively and holding everyone's feet to the fire. So while you're thinking of questions that you'd like to pose to our presenters today, one of our board members in secret will be paying close attention to all the questions being asked today and will award one of you the Tiger by the Tail Award at the end of today, which we felt was the most engaging and thought-provoking and productive questions to our panel today. Next, obviously, it is January. We are in the beginning stages of our annual membership drive, so please, you can either renew your membership today at the table with Elaine, who will be happy to get you set up. We do take cards and PayPal, those as well. Or if you don't have it today, feel free to sign up online at our website at any time. It is very easy to do. And we do have corporate and nonprofit memberships available as well if you'd like to have your company send to different people at a time, which we also welcome as well. Before we get started, I do want to take a very quick moment and thank, on behalf of the entire board, Misty Servia, who is a tremendous, tremendous leader to the Tiger Bay Board last year and took us in a fantastic direction. So Misty, if you will come up here, we'd like to give you just a small token of our appreciation and embarrass you just a little bit and go for the gratuitous photo op.
Thank you.
We also all personally signed a great big thank you card to Misty this year as well, so that you can hang it on your wall and know how much we all loved the 12 months that we had with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And this is for a little bit later,
Okay.
as a gift from the Manatee Board.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you all very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Do you want me to say anything?
Feel free.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much, and I am so grateful to Pat Glass. I think we all need to remember that Pat brought Tiger Bay to Manatee, And I am so grateful for the leadership that this organization has had ongoing, but most of all, I'm grateful that all of you come and participate as members, because I think this is one of the most important organizations that we have locally to talk about timely issues in our community. Thank you very much for the recognition.
And thank you for leaving very large shoes to fill, Misty. I'd like to just kind of go over the rules to keep things simple. We will begin with remarks from each of our speakers in alphabetical order. Each person will be given 8 minutes. As you know, Manatee Tiger Bay tries to pick topics that are very timely both for our community on a local and sometimes even a national level. Today, not only rests on a community level, but as a national level. A lot of us hold a lot of strong feelings and opinions and views on all sides of this issue, just as far as general overall safety in regards to personal liberty and things like that. So I think we've chosen 3 very, very well-informed, educated speakers for you today. After all 3 of them will have made their presentations, we will open it up to Manatee Tiger Bay members. You may approach the mic. Please do us the courtesy of telling us who you are and announcing that you are a Tiger Bay member. If you are not a Tiger Bay member, but you would like to ask a question, you may do so today for the bargain price of a $100 annual membership to Tiger Bay, today and today only. Another new rule that we're going to implement this year is I have this handy-dandy little timer. We are going to set the question times at 30 seconds. We think that 30 seconds is a fair amount of time for anyone to ask whichever questions they would like to ask. So if you are up making your question to the presenters and you hear a little beeping going off, that means that the 30-second time limit is up. And if you continue to talk well beyond that 30 seconds, well, Chief Tyler will probably arrest you for going over the limit. We may just keep him on retainer for the next 11 months to do that for us. So that being said, I would like to introduce our 3 speakers. We will begin with Mr. John D'Aluzio. Mr. D'Aluzio has over 30 years of experience as an insurance businessman with executive management positions in administration, field operations, strategic business development, and claim technical areas. In the course of his career, he has been given numerous industry presentations at major national conferences and is a sought-after speaker who has also served on various advisory boards to insurance industry vendors. Mr. D'Aluzio is a firearms enthusiast, a member of the Manatee Gun and Archery Club, as well as the NRA, and an ardent supporter of the Second Amendment. His letters to the editor of the Bradenton Herald on Second Amendment rights have been published on numerous occasions, and he has made a presentation on a panel discussing gun rights sponsored by the Bradenton League of Women Voters. He holds a BA degree from St. John's University, an MA from Montclair State University, and 2 professional insurance designations. If you would please welcome Mr. John D'Aluzio.
Thank you, Ben. I want to thank my friend Rosalie Schaefer, too, for suggesting that Ben consider me for this panel discussion. I'll get right into it because we only have 8 minutes each, and I don't want Ben to charge me for my lunch if I run over. So 2 words that have caused grief, travail, and other emotions are gun control. Those 2 words seem to be incendiary to the body politic in America. Campaigns use them as a fulcrum to run on, either for or against. And the one thing I think that everybody has to admit here is not to use anthropomorphism when it comes to firearms. Firearms are neither good nor bad. They are inanimate objects. The people who use firearms, on the other hand, can be good or bad. So the first thing I wanted to emphasize is a weapon, whether it is a shotgun, a rifle, a revolver, or a semi-automatic handgun, is neither good nor bad. Now, we all recognize the fact that guns, by their very nature, are dangerous. So there are certain laws that hark back to various legislation that has been passed in the United States. And what we're dealing with now is the Federal Firearms Act of 1968 that was passed, and it puts certain regulations into place. You have to have a federal firearms license to sell guns. You can't buy automatic weapons. You cannot walk out and have somebody deliver a weapon to your home. There are various regulations that have been implemented, and for the most part, very, very good regulations. If you go to buy a handgun today, which is the primary defensive weapon that you would use to protect yourself, you have to have a 4473 form filled out. You have to fill out half of it, and the firearms dealer that is selling you or transferring that arm to you has to fill out half of it. If you have a concealed weapons permit, for which you already have had been fingerprinted, you can walk out with that gun then. If you don't, you have to have a 3-day waiting period. These laws are in effect now. I kept hearing something about a gun show loophole. So I looked at a gun show loophole. There is no gun show loophole. That is a misnomer. If you go to a gun show and you attempt to buy a weapon, there was just a gun show in Palmetto last week at the Manatee Civic Center, otherwise known now as the Bradenton Convention Area Center. You had to have either a concealed weapons permit or you were subject to a 3-day waiting period. Why? Because there is no gun show loophole. It's a misnomer because what they considered a loophole is if I walked into the convention center and I had a weapon for sale and I made a private sale to another individual, then I don't have an FFL license. I didn't look at his background. I don't even know the person. That's the loophole. Has nothing to do with the gun show itself. That's two private people meeting and transferring a firearm. Now, recent executive action taken basically is targeting that area, hobbyists and collectors. They're saying, the federal government is now saying, by executive fiat, not by congressional legislative change, that if you sell a firearm, you should have an FFL license. I want to emphasize that this was the case up until Bill Clinton's administration. At the time of Bill Clinton's administration, there were approximately 250,000 FFL holders in the United States. There wasn't enough resources to police them, and the politicians agreed that hobbyists and collectors were not the true people who were making a living through transfer and selling firearms. But if you did do that, you needed an FFL, if you made your living off it, if you put mustard on the table through that. As a result, they changed the law where you didn't have to have an FFL if you were a hobbyist or a collector. And as if by wizardry, the amount of FFL permits in the United States fell from 245,000 to 45,000 overnight. Okay, that was under Bill Clinton's administration. What we just saw is an executive action that would tighten that back up again, and what's going to happen? Your FFL numbers are going to go back to approximately 250,000. Right now, every wish list item that I have seen by those advocating gun control would have done nothing to stop any of the mass murders that I have seen over the past years here. Nothing. Zero. In fact, it's counterintuitive to me that when people are killed in gun-free zones because somebody doesn't agree that it's a gun-free zone, and usually a deranged lunatic, the reflexive action is to go after the law-abiding citizens and say, we're going to tighten gun restrictions on you who are buying them for self-defense. Does anybody here really think criminals go and buy guns legally? They get them on the black market. They steal them. There's numerous ways to get weapons that are not legal. Those people are not going to do anything about handing in weapons if somebody says, well, we'll just stop it. We'll just have every firearm collected. Does anybody really think that the gangs in our urban centers are going to surrender their firearms because they're told to? Well, why not just make murder illegal, right? That'll stop that, too. Somehow I think that's already illegal. That's just my opinion. In terms of the two legislative propositions that were on the board in Florida, one, campus carry, appears that it's not going to make it out of committee. The other is open carry, and that appears that it's coming. There are 45 states in the United States right now with open carry. Florida is only one of 5 states that does not have an open carry law. The other ones being, and you could probably reel off the first three if you think about it, California, New York, and Illinois. The other one is South Carolina, which really doesn't fit into the mold. I have been asked, well, aren't you afraid that this is going to turn Florida into the wild, wild west? After all, there are 1.4 million permit holders for concealed weapons. My answer is absolutely not. No one I know who has a concealed weapons permit indicates that they would trade in their tactical advantage of a concealed carry to open carry. It makes no sense. I belong to a gun club with 800 members. I've polled many, dozens of them. Not one of them said, yep, that's what I'm waiting for, open carry. I think it's much ado about nothing. I'm sure nobody has polled the other 45 states and asked whether it is the Wild West, but somehow I think you'd hear about that through our media if there were gunfights breaking out in all those other jurisdictions. So, in conclusion, because my 8 minutes is just about up, the words gun control mean different things to different people. To me, it means that in many cases it's an assault on our Second Amendment rights that allow us to defend ourselves about individuals who wish us bodily harm. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Our next speaker up is Mr. Dennis Maley. He is a featured columnist and editor for the Bradenton Times, an online daily newspaper serving the Manatee County area since 2009. His column appears Thursday and Sunday and deals with local, state, and national issues. Dennis is a former captain in the United States Army and a 1998 graduation of Shippensburg University, where he studied government and economics, and was a three-time All-American on the boxing team. His debut novel, A Long Road Home, was published in 2015. Mr. Maley, welcome, and thank you for speaking.
Thank you. I'm going to surprise you a little bit in that I don't disagree with a lot of what John has said. I am the rare person who probably has a lot of concerns about the gun problem and the rising incidence of gun violence in our country, but still disagrees with most of the quote-unquote gun-controlled measures that have been either proposed or passed. I agree with John in many instances that very few, if any of them, especially the ones that have passed, would have prevented the disasters that we've seen. However, there are several common sense ideas that have also been shot down where I think that as a society we would find commonality. Now, I'm someone who's handled guns. As was noted in my introduction, I was an Army officer. I fired everything from a pistol to a shoulder-holstered rocket-propelled grenade. I'm not uncomfortable with them. I don't own a gun. I don't keep one in my house. I've never felt the need to. I don't have a problem with reasonable, level-headed, rational, responsible people having a gun. I don't believe in collecting guns. I don't remember ever hearing of an American politician actually, suggesting that we would round up the 400 million guns or so that are in this country, more than people. That's not on the table. But I think there is room for commonality. And what I like to talk about when we talk about this serious issue is the actual data and the facts. Because when you look at it and you pare past the rhetoric on both sides, the ideological, I'll be honest with you, I loathe getting into this subject in my column. And the reason is simple. Because you start with a reasonable premise and try to have an intellectual fact-based debate, and you are immediately overwhelmed by the zealots on both sides who tend to shout down the reasonable people in between to the point that they don't even want to hear. They close their ears and say, let's let the crazy people fight it out. I don't own a gun, and the reason is the data-driven responses I'm going to give you. Now, it's not lost on me the fact that I'm 6'3", 240 pounds, healthy male. People say, hey, Dennis, you're the heavyweight boxing champion of the Army. You've got a bunch of Golden Glove titles at home. You might not feel like you need to protect yourself the same way, a 100-pound woman might. Completely true. However, when you look at the data, it's not the reason that I don't have a gun. The reason is, statistically, in your home, it is much more likely that a disaster is going to happen against you or one of your family members or a loved one than that you're going to protect yourself with a gun. That's just an irrefutable fact. When you look at it now, last year's data, for the first time in 60 years, more people were killed by handguns than they were by auto accidents. 6 decades it took for that to happen, because you have to go back to when autos weren't as popular. Since 2001, and I say this to give you some perspective, since September 11th terrorist acts of 2001, there have been more than 200,000 people murdered in this country with handguns. More than 200,000. More than double that in accidental firings and suicides. Since then, domestic and otherwise, there have been around 400 acts of what we call terrorism. All right, I'm talking all kinds of terrorism, mass shootings, only about 3 dozen of which have had to do with Islamic terrorism. So when you look at that, and the reason I raise that is to ask you, does this seem indicative of what you see in the media and what you see of the issue in terms of which one we should be spending time and focus on and which one is more of a danger to you? When you look at our country, and if you break it down to what we call the so-called 23 rich nations, our murder rate by handgun is about 20 times that of all other 22 countries. Despite the more than 300 million registered guns in this country, none of the 355 mass shootings in 2015 involved the situation in which an armed civilian shot the perpetrator. So the idea, Wayne LaPierre of the NRA likes to say all the time that the only thing that's going to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. It doesn't pan out factually. Now, every once in a while, I'll take, for example, a couple years ago, there was a mass shooting attempt in a Philadelphia barbershop, and an armed civilian with a license brought out his gun and shot the perpetrator and saved some people's lives. Last year, there was an attempted carjacking in Houston, and an armed civilian pulled out his gun to stop a carjacking and shot the driver in the head and killed him. So again, the idea that arming more people makes for a safer society doesn't bear out. Now, sometimes people say, well, what about for home invasion? Do you know what the incidence of per capita is for death by home invasion in the United States? 0.000002. That's how rare it is. So when somebody says, Dennis, what about if you're walking down the street and somebody comes up with a gun? What do you want? What if they're going to rob you? What do you want to do? Well, statistically, I'm going to give them my wallet and I'm going to call the police. You know why? Because even if I had a handgun on that I'm perfectly capable of using, the idea that I'm going to get it out and defend myself with it is statistically unlikely. The idea that I'm going to now escalate what should be a very, low-level crime into something involving a death is staggering. So I don't want to kill somebody over my wallet, and I surely don't want to be shot. I'd rather report it to the police and call in some credit cards. So when you look at this and you say that arming more people is going to make us safe, whether it's in a gun-free zone or not, it's statistically unlikely. The other thing that I would talk about, what I'd like to finish with, is the idea of escalation. I lived in Colorado where it was open carry. I agree that it doesn't make for a more dangerous situation. What open carry does is very simple, and that's why the NRA likes it. It sells more guns. The more people that are carrying guns, the more people that buy guns. When you're carrying them open, the more intimidating it is, and people start to say, wow, there's a lot more guns than I thought out there. Maybe I should have one. So it's a great issue. And it is overly politicized on both sides. When you look at it and you say, now the NRA has so much influence over the Republican Party that you're watching a debate in which every single candidate is trying to wrestle with the idea that people on a terrorist watch list shouldn't be prevented from buying a gun. Oh, well, maybe we don't know how the people get on there. Some people have gotten on there, and there is a reason why people get on it, and there is a process to appeal it and get off of it. But when you're bending yourself into a pretzel because you're afraid of an organization that is more politically powerful and organized than anyone I've seen, including oil, that's a problem. And on the other side, when you have a bunch of check the block, we're going to do a bunch of things that won't work anyway, and we're going to come after the guy who had probably the most common sense gun ownership legislation of all of them and has a D- rating from the NRA, well, he's not good enough for us either. So when you look at how politically polarized it is, it's no surprise that nothing gets done. But when we look at it as a society, how many people here would honestly tell me they believe with the Florida law that prevents a mental health worker, a psychiatrist, from asking a mentally distressed person whether or not they have a gun at home, whether they have access to it? I have a real close friend who just retired down here. He was a suicide prevention coordinator for the VA, for the whole Eastern Seaboard. And he was utterly shocked. He said, that's the first thing you do when someone's in distress. When we have a veteran that is in distress and is reported as being suicidal, self-reported or otherwise, that's the first question we ask. And we move toward the family to make sure the weapons are secured so that not only they don't hurt themselves, so they don't hurt other people. And when someone says, well, if they're suicidal, they're going to kill themselves anyway. Again, any mental health worker is going to tell you it's nonsensical. You know why? What do you think what's the most common reaction of someone who overdoses on pills? What do you think the first thing that they most likely do is? They dial 911. It's the most common thing they do. You know, there was a survey done of every single person who's ever attempted suicide by jumping off of a bridge and survived it. You know what every single one of them said when the question was, what went through your brain when you jumped? Every single one of them said, I wish I didn't do it. I knew I'd made a mistake. Because in most cases, depression and suicidal thoughts are a temporary situation that can be overcome with medicine and with therapy. But when you pull a gun, there's no looking back. More than twice as many, 24,000 of them each year, are from suicides. These are the statistics, these are the data, these are the hard numbers, and there's something that we have to look at in common sense laws where we can find commonality. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maley. Our third and final speaker today is Chief Scott Tyler. He is the Chief of Police at the Palmetto Police Department. A longtime resident of Manatee County, Chief Tyler started his career at the Palmetto Police Department in 1995. He has held most of the positions at the department, including patrol and community policing officer, patrol corporal and sergeant, SRO supervisor, detective sergeant, lieutenant, and deputy chief of police. Chief Tyler is also a certified crime prevention practitioner through the Florida Attorney General's office, and he has also been a member of the Manatee Technical Institute Criminal Justice Academy staff since 2005 and is currently the MTI Criminal Justice Academy Advisory Board Chair. Please welcome Chief Scott Tyler.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to your forum. In listening to the first two speakers, I couldn't help but notice that although there were some differences, there was certainly some commonality too, and we don't have a polarized debate here. The fact of the matter is, there is no debate. The Second Amendment has been upheld. The Supreme Court has consistently ruled, including in the last 25 years, that not only do individual citizens have the right to bear arms, but individual citizens have the right to bear arms for lawful self-protection. Having said that, even though firearms possession and firearms ownership is considered a right under the Second Amendment, because of the lethality involved with firearms, our government and the courts have consistently upheld the ability of local and state government to do this, have tried to put some reasonable regulations and precautions upon gun ownership. For instance, and we won't get into the argument about restorative justice, but in all states, it is illegal for a convicted felon to possess a firearm, to purchase a firearm. It is also, in Florida, the Florida Constitution also very specifically says that citizens have a right to bear arms and protect themselves. But Florida State Statute 790 has a proviso that habitual drunkards, people that are under, habitually under the influence or being treated for addiction, cannot have concealed weapons permit. They cannot apply for and get one. People who are mentally incapacitated, people that have been under mental health treatment, they cannot. Now, there is a process that should some years pass, and should an addiction counselor or mental health professional say that they're fine to have a firearm, they're allowed to get one. But we have reasonable laws in place to keep firearms from the hands of those that really would be dangerous with them. And for the most part, I would say, and from the position of a police officer, many of these laws work. Those that can lawfully hold a concealed weapons permit, those that can lawfully go into a business and buy a firearm, go to an FFL and buy a firearm, it works. The problem is, of course, the proliferation of firearms in our country, and also the ability of people who otherwise could not lawfully get their hands on firearms to get them. Now, let me take a segue for a minute and talk about some statistics involving firearms for the city of Palmetto. Violent crime in Palmetto and in Manatee County, in spite of the horrible bloody month that we've just had here in Manatee County, is trending down. In Palmetto, over the last 3 years, it's definitely trending down, although my property crime is going up. Property crime being burglaries, thefts, not involving firearms. In 2013, we had 2 murders in the city of Palmetto, and both of them involved a firearm. Both the people were shot. In 2014, we also had 2 criminal homicides in the city of Palmetto. Neither one of them involved a firearm. And in 2015, we had 2 criminal homicides. One of them, unfortunately, claimed the lives of 2 brothers. It was a convenience store robbery. A firearm was used, and then the other incident was a motor vehicle. It was a vehicular manslaughter case. 2016 has been bad so far. I'm hoping that, I'm hoping we're done, but being as it's only February, I'm not so sure. But gun crimes in Palmetto are down 12% over the past 3 years. Gun crimes being murder, logically robbery, and assaults and batteries. It's down. One thing that we do have, and one thing that I do have a concern about, is guns that are stolen. In 2013, 39 guns were stolen in the city of Palmetto. In 2014, 28, and in 2015, 31, so we're back up. Stolen guns generally come from unlocked vehicles. They generally come from situations where they're unsecure in somebody's home. And in a lot of these cases, the firearm is not only unsecure, but it may be a home where maybe it's some young people with people in and out. It may be a home where when you go over, the person opens up the gun cabinet and shows everybody what they have. It's not a good idea. Just like you wouldn't show people coming into your home all the jewelry you've got, right? But it happens. And I'll kind of get into basically stolen guns and what I think are some common sense solutions to that. Open carries come up, and this is a hot topic nationally. It is a hot topic right now in the state of Florida because our legislature is strongly considering an open carry law. As a police officer, and I've talked to a lot of my colleagues about this, some of them are for it. I have some concerns. We will deal with open carry if it comes. I have seen the current version of the bill that's being considered, and it is certainly better than some of the bills that were forwarded earlier. Incidentally, the Florida Sheriff's Association has come out against open carry. The Florida Police Chiefs Association has endorsed open carry, but that was done, we were hoping, because we could get some modifications and some additions to the bill, and we did manage to do that. Some of the issues that I have with open carry, first of all, it requires a retraining of law enforcement officers, extensive training for law enforcement officers, and that's fine because that's what we do every day at our agencies. It's a significant shift. Applying the law is the easy part, but police officers also receive a great deal of tactical training, starting with their days in the police academy and going through their careers. Officer safety is what we call job one, and you can understand why. We want to go home to our families at night. So the way a police officer reacts to a gun that becomes visible in public, that's going to have to be modified a little bit. And I've got no concerns. The men and women that work for me, and I know the men and women that work here in Manatee County and across Florida, we will adjust. But it is a training issue. Secondly, the law itself will probably be difficult to enforce. As the law stands, if you have a concealed weapons permit and you have it with you, you can also openly carry a firearm. The original versions of the bill that the legislature was considering in committee basically put in the bill that it was against law for police to conduct what we call investigative stops or inquiries into whether somebody can lawfully carry or not. Now, we reversed that a little bit, but it still stands that really police would intervene with an open carry if he or she were in the course of committing a crime or suspected of criminal activity at that point. And we all get that. It's people's right to carry a firearm and have a firearm. But the law would be difficult to enforce. My big concern about this, though, is the reaction of citizens themselves. As we get out and move around in a world where we have open carry, reacting to openly armed citizens, will this increase armed confrontations? Studies are limited and don't show an increase so far in other states, as has already been pointed out. We haven't seen the Wild West mentality in the many states that do have open carry. but I do have concerns. We have, a much maligned, sometimes much supported law in Florida called Stand Your Ground. It's basically a self-defense law. And in a way, it's common sense. In a way, maybe the law has gotten a little bit of bad press, but I am concerned about how open carry would affect citizens in claiming that their lives were threatened. I mean, consider a dispute over a parking space where both people get out, exchange angry words, but they're both openly carrying a firearm. The discourse escalates, some choice words are exchanged, and one of the person maybe gets an itch on their side and goes to scratch the itch. The other citizen draws and fires. Now, again, I'm speculating, but it's a concern that I have about open carry. You may argue, well, we already have concealed carry, and who knows how many people out there are carrying firearms. But at least the firearm isn't visible. If the Florida legislature decides to pass this measure, it becomes law, and the only reason that the legislature is considering this is because many of our citizens asked for it, then we will deal with it. But I'd like to kind of finish up with getting back to one of my original points. We talk about common sense, reasonable laws that do not violate a citizen's right to lawful self-defense in possessing and carrying firearms, but place reasonable prohibitions, as our speakers have both talked about. One of the biggest things that I have an issue with is the lack of consistent firearms education. It may be argued that it's my right to carry a firearm, and as it's my right, you can't make me get training. You can't dictate what training I will have. But I would say a police officer carries a firearm every day. We train constantly with use of force decisions, lethality, firearms tactics, and weapons retention. The average citizen does not. This is a safety problem, and especially when we get into open carry. Firearms retention is a huge deal for a police officer. The average citizen does not train or probably even consider it. Probably the deciding factors in which holster to buy for open carry may not be which holster is more secure, but which holster looks the coolest, or which holster matches. Now, granted, maybe I'm reaching a little bit, but I do have a concern about that. Many states do have prescribed courses of training for lawful possession and concealed possession of firearms. Florida does not, and I would like to see that changed. Whether it's law enforcement that does it, whether it's the State Criminal Justice Standards and Training Commission prescribing a training curriculum for law enforcement, for civilian carry, and not just tactical, not just weapons handling and safety, but also applying the law under stress. I think that that is something that we need to look for. In my experience as a police officer in Palmetto over the past 22 years, I have responded to few accidental shootings, but the ones that I have responded to were a lack of safety and a lack of handling. And quite honestly, it gets back to our right to carry and protect ourselves with firearms. Although it's not written into the Second Amendment, I believe implicit in that right is a responsibility and an obligation for each citizen to make an informed, responsible, educated decision about whether he and she are choosing to have a firearm in their life. And a lot of times when I talk to members of the public, when they ask me, should I get a gun or not, that's the point I make. Think about yourself, think about your lifestyle, think about the risk factors. Do you have children in the house? Do you have people in and out? And make an informed decision. Once you decide to exercise your right to lawful self-protection with a firearm, think about the training. Do you know how to apply the law under stress? Do you know how to get that weapon out? Do you know how to safely handle that weapon? Do you know how to safely store that weapon? These are considerations that I think we need to be looking at. And no, I don't think that they violate the Second Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Tyler. At this point in time, we will open the floor up to all of our Tiger Bay members for questions. Again, we like to reiterate that this is where we can kind of really open up the discussion, maybe hold some people's feet to the fire, or bring up some good points that maybe you thought were missed in the discussion thus far. Out of courtesy, we'd like to remind you again that we'd like to keep our questions to 30 seconds. We do not want to have any statements. So if you have a statement, this is not the place for it. The Bradenton Times is probably happy to run an op-ed for you at any given Sunday. But please feel free to line up. And also, when you are asking your question, please state if you want to direct it specifically towards one of our speakers, or if you'd like two or all of them to answer. Thank you.
And my question is, at the time the Second Amendment was written, I think the most powerful weapon you could get was a musket. And the thing that concerns me as a person with a grandson growing up in a dangerous world, and as a person who's actually not inclined to have a gun and have not ever had a gun, I don't understand why people have military-style assault weapons. I don't know why military weapons that are designed to kill a lot of people very quickly are necessary for self-defense outside of war. And Dennis, you may have some insight into that, but to me, that one of the biggest problems that I see is the more and more people that in open carry states do walk around with military assault weapons. I don't really understand how that correlates with the kind of society that we want to create. So I'd like you to comment on that.
I would say I disagree. The Supreme Court last upheld this in 2008. The ruling they're talking about is District of Columbia versus Heller. This was what is known as an originalist argument for the Constitution, which means that we apply it exactly as said, trying to understand what the framers meant. This is not historically how this has been applied to Second Amendment or otherwise. I don't agree. I studied a degree in government. I don't agree with an originalist interpretation of the Constitution. I don't think it's possible to let the framers have the last words today. I just don't think it's realistic. We can't tap them on the shoulder and say, what did you mean by this? So it's always interpretation. And you're right, it's an evolving society, and it was dealing with militias, and it was dealing with a society that had a deep mistrust of standing armies. Right now, we have an enormous standing army. So obviously we've changed. But when you get down, and I'm sure the other gentlemen are going to agree with me to some degree on this, when you get down to parsing there's no such thing as an assault weapon in terms of just a category. There's nothing that defines it. There are very, very few things that you can realistically split hairs over to say, well, you can't have this, you can't have this, that can't then later be modified anyway on the black market. So it gets very, very difficult to do that. But I do agree with you. The idea that people need, basically hand cannons, to protect themselves or their families, or certain kind of ammunition that is much more likely to guarantee death in a shooting seems to me nonsensical, and it does not seem like it leads to a more safe society. But I don't have an answer on how you successfully change that.
I would agree with much of that. When the framers first wrote the Bill of Rights, which was sort of a compromise document to get the Constitution running forward, we did have a much different society. And I spoke about the government's affirmed need to some sensible regulation of firearms. But I don't agree. And there are some local, Illinois, there was a case that came about in the Chicago area where a township decided that they were going to ban assault-type weapons, and I agree. There's no such thing as an assault weapon. That's possibly even a media-coined term that we've been throwing around for about 25 years. What we're talking about are weapons with high-capacity magazines, weapons that can fire a lot of rounds without being reloaded or can be reloaded quickly. And one of the issues, and this is nationwide, but it came to a head in one of the Chicago suburbs, can a local government regulate ownership of assault-type weapons, weapons with high capacities, long guns, AR-15 style weapons? And the court in that case said, yes, they can, because regulating types of weapons does not necessarily interfere with the citizen's right to bear arms and defend themselves. Now, personally, I have a problem with somebody telling me that I can't have a military-style weapon. First of all, what is a military-style weapon? In some countries, military caliber weapons are outlawed. In other words, the Army uses a 9mm, civilians cannot possess a 9mm weapon. Law-abiding citizens should have the right to be able to purchase and buy and own and responsibly use any type of weapon that they feel. I mean, we're not talking about rocket launchers here, but I believe that. I have high-capacity weapons that I personally own. And the argument that somebody who doesn't need or somebody who shouldn't have that weapon may get a hold of it, I'm not really sure it holds a whole lot of water. First of all, my right to own that weapon, I think, is sacrosanct above the fact that somebody may get it from me one day. Second of all, we look statistically, and the data is it's very primitive, and there's not a whole lot of it out there. But I can tell you, talking to criminals in Palmetto that use guns for crimes, we ask them where they got the gun, and a lot of times, and this was also part of the CDC study that President Obama asked for a couple of years ago. Basically, they call it soft resources. Criminals, they do steal guns. They do steal high-capacity guns from law-abiding citizens, but the percentage is small. Most of the time, criminals get guns from acquaintances. Now, maybe they steal them, maybe they borrow them, maybe they have access to them in a relative's home, and they go and help themselves. But I really don't think the difference between me being regulated to a magazine capacity of 10 rounds versus 30 rounds, I really don't think it makes a whole lot of difference. If somebody's bent on killing, they're going to kill.
Yeah, I'm going to do a quick one. How many people in this room know what AR means? What do you think it means? What is it? No, it's not assault rifle. It's Armalite rifle. All right? An assault rifle is a fully automatic weapon. You switch the selector from semi-automatic, which means one pull of a trigger discharges one round. A military weapon is the opposite of that. You squeeze the trigger and 20 rounds come out. We do not have assault rifles that can be purchased legally today. All right? Many of the friends that I have AR, Armalite rifles, which shoots a 5.56 round, otherwise known as 22 caliber, for sporting purposes, for target practice, and for hunting. I see nothing wrong with having a weapon of that nature if you want to do that with. We all agree that weapons used for otherwise things that would be illegal is not proper.
Judy, I typed my question out, so I'm not going to do a statement. What, from each of y'all, what in explaining to a seventh grader, or why explaining to a seventh grader was the Second Amendment written? Why was it written, and for what, and how does it apply to today? Okay.
All right. The Second Amendment goes back to 1791. And I don't think you can really understand the Second Amendment unless you understand the Third Amendment. Do we have any Third Amendment experts here? I bet most people don't even know what the Third Amendment stands for or says. Chief Scott probably does. It's the Quartering Act, where it is illegal for military to use your home for quartering. That was important back then because guess what the British did during the Revolutionary War with disastrous circumstances for the people who housed them. So the Second Amendment is a reflection of the Third Amendment, too. It means that the people in the United States, the citizens of the United States, have the determination for self-defense and as such have the right to bear arms for that purpose. Not offensive purposes, but as a defensive, save-your-life type of situation. So one other distinction. Nobody I know who supports the Second Amendment is pontificating that anybody here should go out and buy weapons if you feel uncomfortable with them. Don't do it if you feel uncomfortable. But I find too many people on the other side of the issue who think that if they don't have a weapon, no one should have a weapon.
I would disagree mostly in that I don't know anyone that doesn't have a weapon that thinks no one should have one. I very, very rarely hear that argument, even from the most progressive liberal side of it. I have an 11-year-old, and we've discussed the Second Amendment ad nauseum. And when you look at it, it's 27 very awkwardly phrased words. It's not entirely clear. And that's where a lot of this problem has come. And when you look at the history of how it's been applied by our Supreme Court very differently. The old legal mantra of your right to swing your arm ends at my nose. I think that plays into this in the extent that when you have a society where there are more guns, and when you say, well, listen, it doesn't include rocket-propelled grenades. Why not? Right? If I have a shoulder-mounted anti-aircraft missile, would everybody in this room agree that I'm armed? Am I? Okay. But they infringe on my ability to be armed in that manner, right? And we infringe on another style of weapons. So the idea of infringement has been accepted to some degree. We can't just arm ourselves in whatever way that we see fit. So all of that is, again, taken from a time when we're talking about muskets, and it has to be applied to a modern society. And one comment I'll make on that is that we keep talking about guns getting in circulation, and Chief Tyler's mentioned several times about how criminals get guns. Another fact, and ask any criminal in Australia, Japan, the UK, is it easier to illegally get a gun in a country where there is more guns than people, or in one where there's not? And the truth is, the more guns that go into circulation, the easier it always will be for the bad guys to get guns. That's a fact again.
Hi, I'm Rosalie Schaefer, and I'm a member. I have a question about stolen guns. Apparently, that's a really big problem, and that's how a lot of these crimes are committed, with stolen weapons. What can be done to help fix this? Would it help to have a computer chip put in every gun that is manufactured? Or what else could be done?
Who would you like to phrase that to?
Oh, everybody.
I'll defer to Chief Tyler on that one.
Although it is true that stolen firearms do make their way into the hands of criminals, there is little data to suggest that that is a preponderance. As a matter of fact, as I said in Palmetto, when we talk to criminals that are willing to talk to us about where they got guns, they weren't necessarily stolen firearms. So, I think that is sort of a myth. Now, stolen weapons, yeah, they get on the streets and they get into the hands of people that don't need them. As far as what can be done about stolen firearms, chipping guns, things like that, I'm not really sure that would help. I think one of the problems that we do have is when you decide that you're going to exercise your Second Amendment right to get a firearm and to keep a firearm, you need to take responsibility for securing that firearm. Now, can we legislate common sense? No, we can't. But unfortunately, I see that as the bigger problem. As I said, most of the stolen firearm reports that we take are with people that leave the gun in the truck or in the car and leave the car unlocked, just like they leave their purse or their laptop in the car and leave the car unlocked. Or they're maybe stolen from a home where, the firearm isn't secure. There's lots of people in and out. And, I can't speak for Bradenton, Manatee County, or other jurisdictions, but that seems to be the way it works in the city of Palmetto. So, it's again, unfortunately, we can't legislate common sense and we can't legislate responsibility, but it comes down to the individual gun owner.
Yes, hello. I'm Randy Cooper. I'm a member of Target Bay. I'm a gun owner as well. Second Amendment mentions something about a well-regulated militia shall not be denied the right. I'm just curious how that clause or phrase fits into this discussion. That question's open to anybody.
Real quick. The Supreme Court has had two landmark decisions in the last several years. One was Heller, the other one was McDonald. In both of those decisions, basically what the majority of justices says, and both, by the way, were 5-4 decisions. My theory is our Second Amendment rights for self-defense hangs by a thread. But in both instances, they said that that preamble on the Second Amendment was descriptive rather than prescriptive.
I might just echo that. A lot of times we talk about the Second Amendment, and I'm certainly not a jurist, but I stayed in a Holiday Inn Express last night, so. But we talk about is that clause applied individually or collectively? And that collectively meaning the state and talking about militias and guards and things like that. And the court, again, in those two decisions, 5-4, both times said it is an individual right. Now, again, I'll echo what we've already talked about. Mr. Maley, you make a good point. Our society's radically different than it was in 1791, and the weapons technology is radically different than it is in 1791. So, we can speculate at what the Founding Fathers had in mind. However, in 1791, and talking about the Third Amendment, the Quartering Act, I think that the framers, a lot of their writings from the period talk about the individual's right to be equal with any type of government, whether it be state or federal. Their right to be equal, their right not to be subverted. And I think that maybe looking at that in reference to individual versus collective, I think it's an individual right to bear arms for lawful self-defense.
Last question today with Marla.
Okay, Marla Huff, and I'm a Tiger Bay member. Chief Tyler, you answered part of my question at the beginning. You spoke about that the Wild West, with the open gun laws, that they haven't seen an increase in crime. I was in a bar in Scottsdale outdoors, and there's a guy with open carry, and it's that combination of alcohol and open carry that it made me feel creepy. I just wonder if there's any statistics about the open carry and alcohol combination.
Well, that'd make me feel creepy too. I'm not aware of any statistics, but I can say this: in Florida, and I'm sure in Arizona, it is against the law to handle and discharge firearms if you're intoxicated, shooting under the influence. And, I'm not trying to simplify or make light of it, but I think it's the same thing as the decision to drive to the bar, get snockered, and drive home. It's against the law to be impaired in handling firearms. So, again, it comes down to we can't legislate responsibility and common sense. And that would have to be something that would have to be handled by law enforcement in Scottsdale if the person got out of hand. I agree with you. It's a little disturbing, but hopefully people aren't, strapping on their 6 guns and going to the bar that often. Sure, it happens.
One thing to add to that, as I said, I live in Colorado where they have open carry. I will tell you that I would not feel safer to walk down the streets of my town in Bradenton to see a lot more people having guns, because I know it'll lead to more people having guns. The example that I'll give you is, imagine going up to Tampa and being outside Raymond James Stadium before the season opener, when people are in the parking lot drinking for 4 hours, up in Tallahassee before a football game, okay? And having those environment with a whole bunch of people with their hand cannons strapped out, talking, whatever kind of smack they are to the other people. And the last statistic I'd like to leave you with, because I said I'm a data guy, gun owners, and this is a fact, University of Pennsylvania study, fact, gun owners are 4.7 times more likely to be shot than non-gun owners. The leading reason, accidental shooting, is second to escalation. Incidents that would otherwise be Chief Tyler and his officers come in to respond to an assault. We had one down in Sarasota just a couple of months back where we had 2 people, just as he described, but it didn't have to do with open carry. 2 people driving, one on a motorcycle, one in a car, having an argument at a red light. They meet up at a gas station later. Gentleman comes up, the much bigger guy, pushes the small guy onto the ground, the guy that was riding the motorcycle. He gets out and fires and shoots him in the chest. And then he says he's going to invoke stand my ground. Okay, so you look at that escalation. More people with guns out in the open. You tell me, with all the things we have with people, road rage and a different kind of confrontations that are increasingly happening in our society, arming more of the people, is that going to make you feel more or less safe? Simple question.
Thank you, Dennis. I totally disagree with your ridiculous opinion. I feel I carry every day. I'm carrying today. I carry everywhere I go. I take now. I pray and hope that I never have to draw that weapon, but I will if I have to. And I find myself even more restrained when I'm carrying that weapon because I know that there's a terrible responsibility if you take another's life. And you should only have to do that if that person is threatening you with great bodily harm or imminent demise. Let me quote a statistic. Right now, the United States has about 95 guns per 100 residents. There's about 315 million guns in circulation among 320 million people. That's a lot of weapons. As a result of that, you would think we were number one in per capita murder rate in the world because we're number one in weapons. Does anybody know the top murder country in the world in terms of per capita per 100,000 people? It's Honduras, socialist-controlled, gun illegal Honduras, with 84 deaths per 100,000. The United States doesn't even make the top 100. We're at 111th with 3.8 murders per 100,000. Now, if you throw Baltimore out, Chicago out, New Orleans out, New York out, all of a sudden we're 204th, just neck and neck with Switzerland. All right, now how does that work? All right, again, it gets to who's using the weapons rather than the weapons themselves being bad.
Thank you. At this time, now that we've had our question and answer time, we'll look to our board member, Chris Wiley, to select who gets the Tiger by the Tail Award for the most engaging question today. Judy Sedgman. Please feel free to come and take the honor of this gorgeous tiger pin.
John, please don't shoot me. I didn't mean to hurt you.
As we just start to wrap up today, I just want to take a quick moment and introduce our 2016 Board of Directors. If you are on the Tiger Bay Board, please stand and just be recognized so everyone in the room can see who is just charged with making this year fantastic again. That being said, just want to do a quick couple announcements. Number one, our next meeting will be Thursday, March 3rd, here at Pier 22. We have chosen the topic of Syrian refugees. This is a issue that has been in constant discussion lately. I think it even goes a little bit deeper. I think we can all agree than just Syrian refugees as to where, do we continue to take the tired, hungry, huddled masses and welcome them into our fold just like a lot of us and our ancestors came here, or do we lean more towards closing the front door and keeping ourselves safe? So we're going to have a terrific discussion on both sides of that issue coming up on Thursday, March 3rd here. So keep an eye on your email boxes as we will be sending out registrations and updates for that. And lastly, we are extremely happy to make an announcement as well. Since the inception of Tiger Bay, we have always had it on the first Thursday of the month. For a lot of extenuating circumstances, we haven't had a choice, but we've had to do it on the first Thursday of the month. Unfortunately, that has come kind of at the exact same time as Sarasota Tiger Bay. We all do business on both sides of the border here, and we like to consider ourselves a community, so it's been hard to kind of go to both sides, but this year, due to a lot of people's hard work, we were able to move some things around. Would also like to thank Pier 22 for being really flexible with their schedule. So starting in April, we will be moving Manatee Tiger Bay meetings to the third Thursday of the month, thereby allowing you to both attend Sarasota Tiger Bay board meetings and to finally have all those people who have been going to the Sarasota board meetings who've been dying to come here and check out Manatees as well. So I think it's just going to get more lively, and this room's going to get a lot more full. So again, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for taking the time out of the day. Hope you have an absolutely wonderful day, and we will see you next month. Thank you.